as I was taking time to reflect upon the readings this week in preparation for this morning, a thought came to me that an excuse that we often use when we do things that we recognize as being inappropriate, or perhaps even when we try something and we fail at it, we tend to say, from time to time at least, well, I'm only human after all. and we use that only human after all as an excuse for not living up to what we had intended to be or to do, or as an excuse for not having tried hard enough, or as an excuse for saying, well, you know, I really am not good at that, but I'm only human after all, so, you know, that's okay. And I think as we listen to the scriptures today, we hear that being human isn't all that good a thing. So to claim that we're only human after all is, I think, to miss the point. When we say we are only human, we're limiting ourselves and preventing ourselves from really grappling with the truth that we are more than just human. And if we use being human as an excuse, we really should be saying, well, I did that, or I failed to do something because I'm not living up to who I really am, and I'm blaming it on just being human. I'm not allowing myself to truly be who I am. If we listen to the story of Jesus and his interaction with the disciples, he says to them that when he goes into Jerusalem, he's going to be handed over into human hands, and they will crucify him. And if we take that story and reflect upon it, and put it into the context of what James was writing about, we see that Jesus is talking about being handed over into imperfect people, handing over to people who have a lust for power, handing over to people who are greedy, who are ambitious for wrong things, who want to live life according to their terms and not according to the dream of the garden that God intends the world to be. Jesus uses the term into human hands as a negative, not in the same way that we use the word human when we say, well, I'm only human after all. To be human in the context of the gospel and James' insight is to be, in quotations, sinful. Not sinning against God, but sinning against ourselves. Sinning against what we are capable of being and what we should be. And saying, well, you know, after all, that's the way it is, and that's the way it always will be. And so, you know, I don't live up to my potential, but what difference does it really make? Well, it makes a whole lot of difference. Because when I'm living my life as only human, I could very well be living my life as those into whose hands Jesus was placed to be crucified. I am only human, and I allow people to be hungry. I am only human, and I allow conflicts to fester within my family. I am only human, and I don't do what I know I could do to make a difference in other people's lives. I'm only human after all, so I can go to bed and say, oh well, too bad, somebody else can look after it. Jesus has a different understanding of who he was. Jesus knew that he was living in a human experience, but the way he lived in the human experience reveals something else. And that's why we're here today. We're here today because we say Jesus was Son of God. Jesus was divine. Jesus was the presence of the one that we believe in, God who is Creator. And then we say, good for Jesus. But Jesus was no different from you or me. The difference can be, of course, that he believed in who he really was. And we don't. And we don't because we have not been taught to. We don't because we have been told. We're only human after all. And human people are sinful people. And human people are bad people. And human people put Jesus on the cross. And it's not just them, they're people back in Jerusalem. Oh no, we weren't satisfied with that. You put Jesus on the cross because of your sins today. And I put Jesus on my cross because of my sin. Wasn't that what we were taught? Jesus died for our sins? That's not what James is telling us and Jesus is revealing. Those that put Jesus on the cross were failing to live their lives as God intended them to live it. And that's why Jesus ended up on the cross. Not because you and I said darn instead of holy, not because we had bad thoughts, but because people were living for their own greed, ambition, power, and whatnot. And Jesus was a threat. And Jesus was a threat because he was calling people to live as God intended them to live. Which explains why Jesus, in another part of the scriptures, says to his disciples that after his death he would send his Spirit to live within them. The same Spirit that we say we celebrate on Pentecost Day. Not just a story about the ancients, but about ourselves, that the Spirit of God dwells within us. And if we are to be true to who we are, then we have to live that Spirit. So the divine breath that I preach about so often is the essence of who we are, and when we fail to live that Spirit, we sin. And as I just suggested, not about God, but about ourselves. We fail to allow ourselves to be what we are capable of being. What I'm trying to say to us, friends, is that I think we're at a turning point in the future of the church. And I think we must recognize that all that ancient way of thinking just turns people away. Because what we have been doing down through the ages is coming before a judgmental God, confessing how bad we are, feeling absolved for our sins, going out and doing them all over again and coming back and doing the same thing, telling God how sorry we are. What we should be doing, I believe, as church, is forgetting all about our need to be forgiven by God, and rather look at ourselves and challenge ourselves to be who we are. And we can only be who we are if we believe that at the core of our being is God. That the life within us is divine life. And the body that we have is simply the tabernacle in which that God lives. And when we believe that, we can say, if you touch me, you touch God. And if I touch you, I touch you with God. And God touches you through me. The image of God as separate from us, living in another world, in another place, made all kinds of sense to the ancients. But it shouldn't make sense to us today. I'm going off on a little tangent here. A few weeks ago, I listened on the internet to the ordination celebration of a friend of mine from years ago. I haven't seen him in quite a while. But he was being ordained as the Bishop of Pembroke. He's 70 years old. Just a fresh new face for the Diocese of Fairfield. And I was really surprised at the celebration because it was on, in the Catholic Church, the Feast of the Assumption of Mary. And the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church believes that because Mary was sinless, she couldn't die. Because after all, death only exists because of sin. You see, you wouldn't have died if you hadn't been terrible sinners, or if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten stupid apples. But anyways, it's the Feast of the Assumption that Michael is being ordained the Bishop of Pembroke. Well, all this focus of the celebration was on Mary. And the bishop who preached at the ordination ceremony was preaching about Mary. And she was immaculate, you know, because she never even had a venial sin, don't you know. Her. She never told Joseph he was a pain in the butt. But then he goes on to say, of course, it's the Feast of the Assumption. And Mary, at the end of her life, is assumed up into heaven. Bodily ascends into heaven, he says. And his hands are going like this, you see. He's going up, she's going up into heaven. Then I said to myself, God, do you ever watch television? Do you ever pay attention to the news? Because while all this stupid theology is being preached, there are people up in the spacecraft who couldn't go out into the atmosphere without being bundled up in spacesuits and helmets. If that story that he preached was true, once she got beyond the forces of gravity, she would have exploded. You need a spacesuit to go up there. So what I'm saying is, what we hear in church doesn't make sense in the world. And being told that we're terrible people only contributes to the terribleness of the world. What we need to hear and believe is what Jesus believed about himself. That God was present in his life. If we believe that God is present in our life, when we fail to live godly lives, sure we sin, but not against God, but against ourselves, preventing ourselves from blossoming into the fullness of who we truly are. So we've got to get rid of the junky thinking. You're not bad people. I'm not a sinner. I'm divine. And my body cries out for me to use that divinity to transform our world. That's what Jesus was doing, and that's why human hands crucified him. Because they couldn't stand the fact that there was something more than what they were, power-grabbing dictators. And if we look at our own world today, and we see the dictators that exist, what we can say is there's divine life in them, but they're not allowing it to manifest itself. They're living human lives. And the human lives they are living is causing them to lust and to be greedy. And in the context of our news today, greedy for Ukraine, I want it for myself. Greedy for Palestine. Greedy. And that's what Jesus is saying. When you live human lives, that's the fruit of your humanity. If you lived divine life, you would be like a little child, which is what he tells us in the gospel. Whoever welcomes a child welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not just me, but welcomes God. And so to be divine in our world today, to be what we are called to be, is to try as best we can to be like little children. And so we need to ask ourselves, what are some of the things we know about little children? God's children. But one of the things that I experience through other people's families is that children are fundamentally loving people. Children are very welcoming people. When I visit somebody's home and there are little children are curious people. Doesn't take much for a little child to crawl up on a sofa and sit next to you. Doesn't take much for a little child to be inquisitive about what you're wearing. Doesn't take much for a little child to pull at your earrings. Not that I wear them, but you know, child ever pull your earrings, Charles? But they're curious, they're welcoming, they're trusting. Little children are like that. Little children are accepting. You see the little commercials on television, and it's oftentimes when they're trying to sell you something, portraying how little children are just so accepting of others. And one of them is a little white boy and a little black boy playing together. And the message, of course, is that little children don't see color like that, don't see differences. All they see is, there's a friend to go and be with. There's someone to share my life with, someone to have fun with, someone to be happy to be in this world with. To live divinely is to be like a little child and to look beyond the prejudices that cause us to be just human. I'm afraid of the different ones. Well, I'm only human after all. But I'm not. I'm divine, and if I am, then I should see the divinity in the one that I'm afraid of. I should know that, like a little child, if I were to play with that person, get to know that person, I discover the presence of God in that person. Because that's where God lives. Children can be very forgiving. I'm sure you all know the experience of two little kids or a group of little kids fighting with each other. And soon thereafter, they're all playing ball together. They get over it. They know how to let go. They know how to forgive. And they know it's more important to be at peace with each other than it is to hold grudges. That's what James is talking about. We live with grudges. We live with anger. We live with prejudice. And we're only human after all. Little children are creative children. Give them a piece of paper and some crayons. Let them create. Could be mishmash of everything, but it doesn't matter. They're expressing who they really are, creator people. And if we are to be like little children, we too should be creating people. Creating not just for our own purposes, but creating the world that we say Creator God has made. But it's not Creator God, it's creating God. And creating God is within you and me. And so like little children, we need to be creating if we are to live divine lives. Little children love creation. They make mud pies. And they eat dirt. They're not afraid of the world that we are in. They dig up worms. And if somebody isn't there to say, well, I don't think you should eat that worm, they might. But they see that there's wonder and awe to be discovered in creation. And here we are in a world that is burning up in some places and scorched in others, deprived of water in some places and flooded out in other places. Our climate is in danger. It is dangerous right now. And like little children, if we are to be divine, we have to be aware that creation has been put into our hands to be cared for, enjoyed, appreciated, and not just tolerated with the notion that has been within us saying, well, okay, so the world is going to hell. That doesn't matter because one day we're going to heaven. Heaven is supposed to be here. God has dreamed the garden. And little children know how to cultivate that garden, not the same way as gardeners do, but they know enough that there's something beautiful about it and precious about it to be played with. And like little children, we should be playful in that way as well. If there is a conclusion to what I'm trying to say, is that as church, we should be proclaiming that we are not human. We should be proclaiming that we are the dwelling place of God, not within the building that we find ourselves, but within our very fiber. And we should need to look back into the second chapter of Genesis and remember that in the theology of the ancient writer, not a historian, but a theologian, his understanding was that there was no life within creation until Creator breathed into the nostrils of the first person divine life and entrusted that divine life to the corporeal, to the physical, to the body, to creation itself. We need to stop as church, I believe, reaching out into the skies to finding God and looking inward to discover the divine presence. And once we discover it, become like Jesus and live our lives in such a way that we become a pain to those who are living according to what James is saying is wrong. We need to go out into the world and disturb it, and to support those who have that same vision, and to recognize that it's not about greed and selfishness and power. It's about cultivating, caring, accepting, loving, welcoming, playing with, forgiving. All the things that little children can teach us. And perhaps that would lead us into the same mess that Jesus got into. Those who are living human lives might very well reject us, might very well persecute us, might very well tell us we're crazy. Well, if it's any consolation, we're here this morning, and I'm sure there's a lot of people think we're crazy for being here. So we might as well be crazy for doing the right things, rather than being accused of being crazy for thinking God is sitting on a cloud looking down on us. So who are you? That's what you need to wrestle with, and I need to wrestle with. To really grapple with it. Do I believe that? Do I sense it? Do I have the courage to live it? And what a preacher is supposed to be doing on a Sunday morning isn't telling you that's the message and it's all over, but rather inviting you to go home and sit and think about it and pray about it, wrestle with it. Can you really believe what Jesus believed about himself? Can you really believe what Jesus came to an insight about when in his baptism experience he had a sense that he was a child of God? Can we really truly understand and grapple with it and believe it and live it? And if we can, then what a difference we can make. So I hope you just don't go away and say, well, that was nice that he thought all those things. Or isn't he crazy for thinking those things? Or whatever. He said those things, I better go home and think about it.